Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ESS Small Business COVID-19 Survival Panel, session number 12. I hope you're well, wherever you are around Australia. Today, I'd like to welcome our guest presenters, Andrew Geddes, former chair of Green Cross Limited, a coach and mentor to professional firms and SMEs all over Australia. How are you today, Andrew?
Very well, thank you, Peter.
Thank you and welcome. And we also have with us from Wellington, New Zealand, Anna Gunther, Director of Pledge Me, one of the Australian and New Zealand crowdsource funding intermediaries. Welcome, Anna. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And obviously, I'm your host. If you have any questions during the webinar, if you're watching the webinar live, can you please type your question into chat, and I will pose the questions to Andrew and Anna during today's session. If you're watching on Facebook Live, welcome. I hope you enjoy this broadcast. You won't be able to send us your questions into the live webinar, but if you can send an email, peter@essbiztools.com.au. I'll make sure that we send those questions on to Andrew or Anna and get them, they'll reply to you, and we will publish your question and their answers on our websites. A reminder that the recording of this webinar will be available on the ESS Small Business website in the next couple of days, and we will be sending emails with links to the webinar to people on our database and who have registered for this webinar today. Challenges facing SMEs in the post-COVID-19 environment. I'd now like to present to you Andrew Geddes, who is going to take you through this subject matter for you today. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just trying to share my screen.
No, I did that the wrong way. Yeah, you're right now.
Have you got it?
Yes, it's right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Just making sure that this is working. So Peter's asked me to speak to you about the current environment. You don't need me to tell you that changes have occurred in your marketplace because of the situation that we're in with lockdown, and you really need to start thinking about resetting your business strategy. Now, what we're going to look through today are these 9 points. The first 3 we've covered in earlier sessions. And I'm just going to recap on those: becoming COVID capable, talking about the values we've driven into the firms we're working with, the businesses, the small businesses we're working with, and having set up senior leadership teams. And then we'll move into looking at the future and setting strategy and work through some business examples to give you some insights into what some of the firms I'm working with and Peter's working with have been doing. So initially, when lockdown hit, all of us had to look at how much cash have we got and what are we invoicing and collecting, and can we get money from the government or the bank or landlords or from various other suppliers, and then what have we got to do to make sure our employees are safe and our customers are safe, and setting up those COVID procedures. The one thing that we did was improve our communication, and we had daily and weekly overviews with the managing director or the boss talking to the team. We looked at how can we improve the experience that all our clients or customers are having at every interaction point they had with us, and beginning to think about can we simplify the way we do business? Can we get rid of duplications or wastage? How do we make the whole process more positive and easier for everyone concerned? Then in all of the firms we're working with, we've said, come on, we need to set, if it's a big company, a senior leadership team. If it's a small business with 3 people, that's the team. But let's create an opportunities mindset in terms of let's talk with and listen to our customers, find out how they're feeling, what they're looking for in terms of the way they interact with us, and what might we do to make ourselves easier to do business with. Because as you know, a lot of people have gone online for communication with the family. They're buying things online. All of this is a new way of interacting and doing business. It's simpler, hopefully, in most cases, if the businesses have got it right. Consequently, we can't rest on our laurels and do what we used to do because we're being compared with other businesses that are changing. For example, I had a hip operation recently, and my anaesthetist sent me an invoice with an email saying, I've got money for you from your insurance provider, and I've got it from Medicare, and this is what you owe me. Ring up and use your credit card. Took 3 minutes. I then got an invoice from my surgeon, and it required me to fill in forms and my wife to stand in queues, and even then it took weeks, and we got lots of paperwork, and I thought, blimey, I think they should get with it and speak to the anaesthetist and use those sorts of systems. So even in a situation of medical services, one was easy and one was not. One was using new techniques, one was not. So in thinking about the future, situations and attitudes have changed. And consequently, historical demand is going to be different. And in working with businesses around the country, it's different wherever you are. And as you know, it's changing in Victoria as we speak, as it's gone back into lockdown. So you really need to start being more flexible in your thinking. Don't be a slave to traditional thinking, meaning don't approach it as you always have. Engage your team. Everyone should be encouraged to speak with customers and ask them, and we'll look at a range of questions that they can use in a moment and discuss it within the senior leadership team and have more input into your thinking about what you might do to make your business easier to interact with and to improve it. So in terms of creating strategy, the starting point is to understand where your revenue is coming from. Various service lines, various products, what are they all? And who are the sort of customers that are the easiest to deal with, who are pleased to interact with you, a pleasure to do business with, spend money, don't haggle and make it difficult. And what we've been doing is asking them a number of questions in order to revisit our strategy. Now, strategy is just a flash management speak word about stuff you need to do in order to please your customers. So we've been asking them, well, the service you use or the products you use, what does it do for you? Now, that's a physical description. Traditionally, most advertising talked about that. It doesn't work anymore. The next question is, well, what's the outcome the use of our service or product provides for you? And you need to understand why people are prepared to spend money with you and begin to build examples of those outcomes into your storytelling, in your marketing, and then talk with your salespeople about it. And as they interact with customers, they should be having a good understanding of why people are spending money, the outcomes they're looking for. And then the next two questions really allow you to get into your brand DNA. And that is, well, using our service, how does it make you feel? And how does it make you look? Now, insight into that helps you refine your storytelling, both on your website, in your digital marketing, in some of your traditional marketing, and again, in the conversations your salespeople have. So let me give you some examples of this. I'm the external chairman of SDG Land Development Solutions. They're one of Sydney's best surveying companies. They won the medium-sized surveying company award of the year in their particular profession last year. We asked our office manager to ring 30 of our best clients, and she asked them those four questions. Let me show you. Oops, no, here it is here, I beg your pardon. we asked them, well, what do you do? What services and products? And they said, well, you do surveying for us. You either survey land for a suburban development, or you're surveying construction as we're building complexes. Okay, well, what is the outcome that you want? Well, we want it on time, on budget, and we want to get through the red tape. And now this is where it was interesting. How does it make you feel? And they said, well, assured, confident, and in control. How does it make you look? Professional. And a number of them then voluntarily entered into conversations with our office manager saying, we know you're more expensive, but we're happy to pay your fees because there's no mistakes made. You deal with the red tape. You help us make sure we're ready for all of that. And we actually get a much better result on time, on budget, on quality, on relationship. The return on our investment is good. Some of them actually said, we actually used someone else who's cheaper and we got into strife. They stuffed it up. So we're back with you and prepared to pay. Now, as a result of talking to those 30 best clients, we decided that we're going to stick with our guns. The whole profession in surveying has been frantic for work. They're frightened and they're discounting. And we went, we're not going to do that. We're going to stick with belief in ourselves and continue to have those conversations with our clients. And consequently, in the last couple of months, we have had our best months ever. So ask the questions. Let me give you another example. Here's an IT startup. Let me see if I can open up this website, Peter. This will be an interesting experiment. This is etivitynews.com. This is a new company that has been launched. It's going to act as a place where consumers are kept in the know and small producers have a place where their products can be represented. So etivity.com. Now let me just...
Yeah, it hasn't come up yet, Andrew.
Oh, hasn't it?
Huh?
Maybe it's not going to, Peter. So what I'll do is I'll go back to where I was. Oh, well, that was an interesting experiment. Are we back now, Peter?
Yeah, you
probably haven't left, and I've been looking at this website. Okay, so you can have a look at etivitynews.com. It's a startup. Again, this website has information and stories about regional and smaller Australian food producers. It also has information about health and recipes and alternative clean, green foods. It has information about harvests and conditions in regional areas. There's interviews of the people running these businesses, and it's designed for consumers who want to access these types of food and information as an information source. So when we asked the questions of the small producers, what does our service do for you? They said, it gives us visibility and exposure. What outcome do you want? Sales. How does it make you feel? And they said, well, it's good being on the website. We feel more confident about the future, particularly as new sales occur. And how does it make you look? They said, well, modern and with it, because we're on a digital media company, food information site. So they were happy with how we were making them look. When we asked the consumers, they said, of course, this is a different story altogether because it's a different group. And you'll notice we're looking to get both of them involved in our digital marketing. They said, we want information about Aussie food producers. And in terms of the outcomes it gives us, well, ideas for cooking, health, farm visits, purchases, online purchases. How does it make you feel? Knowledgeable. And how does it make you look? Cool. So in attracting that type of reader, we are having conversations with them through Facebook and other forms of social media to make sure that the stories we're telling are engaging them, and it's the knowledgeable and cool elements that are really creating some traction. So again, it's a blend of marketing for two types of clients who are interdependent. The company then is a media production company that's producing promotional videos and other materials for the small producers to help them in their marketing. So in fact, we've got 3 separate profit centers, all of which have different customer groups with different needs and goals, and hence our messages have to be refined in that way. So what do our products and services do? That's the physical description. What are the outcomes they deliver for you? This is why people buy. This is what your marketing needs to focus in on, not the car, but what it allows you to do. But how does it make you feel and look? Now that's the emotional connection, why people are prepared to spend money. And that's where your storytelling needs to focus on, particularly in these modern digital marketing and communication times. So having been through that process of setting up a senior leadership group, asking people who are directly interacting with clients and customers to have those conversations and ask those 4 questions and feed it back into the senior leadership group. Once a week, we're talking about who did you talk to? What did they say? How did they see us? We're then saying, all right, as a leader, as a senior leadership group, what do you think our strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities are? And the old SWOT analysis, the T doesn't mean threats, it means trends. How is the thinking of our client groups or our customer groups changing? What are those trends? Are their attitudes different? Are they looking for us to be easier, more modern? Do we need to be seen to be putting in the extra effort? Then in formulating strategy, think about, well, what do you want to be like over the next 12 months, maybe in 3 and 5 years out in terms of revenue, profit margins, and what's the cash required? What do we have to do with our products and our services, and what sort of customers do we want? Hence, what do we need to do with our brand and our marketing and our sales? Particularly sales, where your people who are directly interacting with clients and customers need to understand how you see the next 12 months in terms of the conversations we need to have, the asking of those questions. Then can you invest in technology and restructure your team so that we can give the customers what they're looking for? Do we need to streamline and simplify our processes and systems? I gave you a medical practice example of a need to do that. And then in terms of governance, how do we make sure we actually implement these ideas, these actions? So looking at your pattern of meetings, and are you having a daily 5-minute stand-up one-on-one with your direct sales people? Are you having a weekly brainstorm with the senior leadership group? Are you setting some project groups, 1 or 2 or 3, to try and improve elements of your business? And are you reviewing that on a weekly, fortnightly basis? So it's talking with your team, talking with your customers, setting up some project groups to improve things, and then making sure that happens. And in terms of the functional responsibilities, in a small business, that's usually the owner looks after everything. In a bigger one, there may be someone in HR, someone in marketing, someone in finance. Who are the people that are responsible in each of these areas? And making sure every team member knows who is and who they can go to with ideas and requests for how to make it easier for them to look after their customers or their clients. So that strategic planning framework is really simple. Simply, where are we now? How might we improve in the next 12 months? And who's going to do what? And how can we drive that to make sure it happens? So setting strategy and making sure it happens, it's as simple as that. And it's just about doing stuff so that you're better than you were last week. I'd just make some final comments, Peter, about once we've decided on 2 or 3 things to improve, and I don't think it should be more than that, because otherwise we just get lost in, it's overwhelming. But let's split our team up to work in these projects. And let's get them meeting regularly, and let's get them to create a list, set up a spreadsheet and put down all of the ideas. For example, we talked about simplifying a invoicing and collection procedure in a medical practice. Well, what are all the actions? How do we get in contact with Bupa and set up so we can do it automatically for clients? How do we do it with Medicare? How do we have a situation where we then have a final invoice and we email it to our patients and they simply ring up with their credit card and pay it and it's done in 5 minutes? How can we do this? So what are all the actions we've got to do? Who's going to do each one? When do we want it done by? And then meeting regularly and improving it. So by establishing project groups and having a list of actions, and I wouldn't cross the actions off or delete them, I'd just change the color of them so that when the group meets, they go, there was 33 things we had to do. Half of them have been changed color, so they've been done. That's a visual example of progress and is motivating. And that's how to, small business people, you've got to be a coach of your project groups, just like a sporting coach is involved in doing a similar activities in communication and setting targets and reviewing it with their teams. Then finally, you can fit all of that into the scaling up structure that, again, I've been through a couple of times in these SME sessions with ESS BIZTOOLS, but that's, I guess, putting this into a broader perspective of the focus of the business, our purpose, our values, and then just making sure we've got the right pattern of meetings to drive these changes. For some of you, getting your accountant involved in helping you as a member of your advisory board or simply a participant in a monthly review of actions implemented, make sure you do it because they're going to turn up. And if you haven't done anything, you'll look like a turkey. So it's a simple role that accountants, your advisors can help, or getting a business coach, someone who's more specifically understands your industry perhaps. So the post-COVID environment, Peter, there's been a lot of change. There's still a lot of pressure out there. If we're going to survive, we need to realise that we have to drive at being easier to do business with. We have to make ourselves focused with our team on our customers, asking how are they judging value for money? How does it make them feel and look, and improving those things so that they're delighted with us. So yes, it's a trying time, but it's a time where we have to step forward and get into it. I hope these frameworks help you. Speak with your accountants. And I guess, Pete, I'd throw it over to you and say, well, there may be some questions. Otherwise, that's my 20 minutes. I'm just trying to get out of my, there we go.
Yes, we got you back there now. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew. Is there any questions from anyone? No, there hasn't been any typed in at this stage, but if anyone's got any, they most welcome to type them in now, and we'll ask Andrew a little bit later on. The SMEs turning to their accountants for assistance, Andrew, I know you in particular, and me to a lesser extent, have been involved in this journey with trying to encourage accountants for many years. Do you see that one of the aftermaths of COVID-19 will be that many accountants will be far more interested in supplying these types of services to small businesses?
Well, I hope they're going to be, Peter. I think they've been very busy helping clients fill in the government forms to get various grants that have been based both from federal and state governments for the COVID response. I really hope that they get more involved helping their clients establish project groups and look at improving the way they operate. I know some of them are actively delegating the compliance and COVID form filling to their team members and starting to play this role. So if they don't, I think small business people are going to find coaches outside of the accounting profession to help them. So perhaps it's one of the things that's going to change the accounting profession as the government grants and that side of business declines, and the tax office makes tax return preparation using technology and cloud accounting systems simpler, the accountants may have to find new things to do. So perhaps this is a natural area for them to move into.
Well, I hope they become far more proactive and able to assist clients on this journey. But we might come back to that a little bit later on, if that's okay. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Pleasure, Peter.
It was very interesting. And we'll just now go back to bringing up. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Anna Gunther, a director of Pledge Me. Pledge Me is one of the crowdsourced funding intermediaries operating in Australia, but also in New Zealand. And I've listed there that Anna was joining us from Brisbane, but I now know that Anna is actually in Wellington, New Zealand. So good afternoon, Anna. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Peter. I normally am based in Brisbane. I'm just stuck because of COVID, which I think is affecting quite a few people at the moment. So, yeah.
So welcome to this series. This is the 10th week, I think, or the 11th week of our small business presentations. So welcome, and I look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen.
Sure.
I'm going to be talking a little bit to funding SMEs right now through COVID and further, but also specifically with the angle of crowdfunding, since that's the thing I know the most about. So as introduced, my company that I co-founded is Pledge Me. My name is Anna Gunther. I'm co-founder and chief bubble blower, because when you start your own business, you're allowed to call yourself whatever you want. And when your logo is a bubble, it just seems to make sense. My lawyers do refuse to put that on any official legal opinions, though.
Yes, and I actually didn't show it today. I didn't know whether you it was serious, but we should have. Bubble blower.
No, I go with it. I go with it. I've had people tell me before that maybe blowing bubbles in the financial markets is a bad look. I think it's bursting bubbles that's a bad look. So, but so funding SMEs, and specifically with the context of crowdfunding, I'm hoping that people watching know what crowdfunding is, but really it is as simple as it sounds. You go out to your crowd for funding. You set a goal of how much money you want to raise, a deadline in which you want to raise it by, and you offer something in return. I think one of the misconceptions often is it's cyber begging. So you're asking for donations or for just support for nothing. But typically crowdfunding, where it works best, is where you actually offer something. So with project-based crowdfunding, that's where you offer a reward. So the thing that you're making, and it can be really useful for early stage SMEs who are just getting going. And sometimes even pre-selling an idea before they've created it. Equity crowdfunding is actually where you're issuing shares in your company. And so you're raising investment online. Again, at an earlier stage than you typically see people going out to raise investment potentially. And then lending-based crowdfunding is actually where you borrow money from your crowd at an interest rate that you set, and then you repay it over time. So Pledge Me, we were founded in 2012 in New Zealand. So we've been doing crowdfunding for a very long time. We were the first licensed platform in New Zealand and one of the first in Australia as well. So we're really used to starting new things. So in 2017, we came over to Australia. The same day, actually, the legislation changed to allow equity crowdfunding. And we had one of our largest campaigns over in Brisbane when we first started over there, where they raised $2.1 million for a local food shed. We've had over 1,500 successful campaigns across the different types of crowdfunding, and over almost $50 million pledged to the platform. So we've seen everything you can think of and not think of, from a man who was building a bionic hand for his friend through to a brewery that raised $2 million in 2 days to build a new space that they could increase their production in. So crowdfunding is a really young industry. I think, as I said, it hasn't been around that long from an equity crowdfunding perspective, but it's also young in terms of the people that are using it. I think 80% of our users are under the age of 30. So that's where most of the money is coming from, but also most of the campaigns. But it's also young in terms of the people starting the companies. So one of the larger project-based campaigns that we've seen to date was for a woman named Deanne, who started a milk and cookie cafe. And she was in a situation where her rent was increased 40% with very little notice, and decided that instead of staying in that space, she'd actually raise money through her crowd and buy a bus and make a milk and cookie bus. And so I know that's slightly different to what we're experiencing right now with COVID, but like something came out of the blue and she just had to figure out how to respond. And she went out to her crowd and offered them rewards. So things like cookies, obviously, but also she did a collab with a brewer. So she made a beer cookie and a cookie beer and started selling those through her campaign page. She also offered people dates. So she'd go out on a date with them if they pledged over $100. And she managed to raise $91,000 through her crowd by pre-selling product, but also providing experiences for people, which we're seeing happen actually now, specifically with smaller SMEs that are trying to figure out how to respond to COVID. They're going out to their crowd and offering them things that they want in return for some interim funding to get through. But crowdfunding is growing, not just in terms of how many platforms there are in the world. There's thousands of platforms now, but also the speed and the scale at which people are raising through their campaigns. One of our quickest campaigns to date was for a craft beer company called Yeasty Boys. They launched a campaign to fund their development and market entry into the UK. And they actually managed to raise $500,000 in half an hour from their crowd. Everyone from Stu's next door neighbor, Stu's the founder, he's on the right there, through to their distributors in Hong Kong. People investing in the company when Stu had been told basically no one would invest because they didn't own any bricks and mortar. And it's not just growing in sort of the later stage companies or companies that are already going. We've had a company year before last who raised investment when they were just getting started in the medical cannabis space in New Zealand, and a company that wanted to provide employment for their young people in a region of New Zealand that has the highest rate of unemployment, the highest rate of youth suicide, and the highest rate of Indigenous people. And so an Indigenous group came together to start this company in the medical cannabis space and went out to their local community and talked about what they were planning. And when they launched their campaign, it actually took our platform down twice. There were so many people trying to invest, and they raised the maximum of $2 million in 10 minutes of going to the public. Jeez. And crowdfunding is estimated to keep on growing. They said that in 2017, $34 billion were pledged through crowdfunding platforms internationally, and they're estimating that amount to reach $300 billion by 2025. And while we've seen over the last few months that crowdfunding has declined due to COVID in certain areas, we do believe that this tool is going to be more necessary than ever as we start to rebuild our economies. The thing that I love the most about crowdfunding is it's diversifying who's funding and who's getting funded. I think, as I said earlier, over 80% of our investors are under the age of 30, but over 60% of our companies have female founders. And that just sounds like it's the way it should be. But when you look at traditional venture capital, only 4% of companies have female founders and 0.5% have female CEOs. So we're really excited to see people like Megan May, who started a bakery where she was creating raw food and selling it through a cafe. Now they create, I think, over 10,000 products a day in their factories. When they went out to raise investment, they managed to raise $2 million in 8 days, or 8 years if you look at how long the company has been around and been growing with their crowd. But it's not just young people that are crowdfunding. People over the age of 30 are raising investment too. These three founders actually are engineers. They used to work at Fisher & Paykel, and they decided to figure out how to build a wind turbine together. And it took them quite a long time because they're engineers. But when they went out to raise investment to start manufacturing, they managed to raise money from the people that had seen them putting these wind turbines around the hills of their town, testing them out over the years. So I'm just going to quickly run through the 3 elements to a great campaign. And if anyone has any questions, do just jump in as I'm going. But there's 3 things that we recommend you think about if you're thinking about running a crowdfunding campaign. The first one is just actually making sure you have a good company or a good campaign. Like you're clear on how the money coming in is going to help you grow. And you're really clear in how you explain that to people. People don't want to read a novel. They want a simple sort of 1 or 2 liner. This is the money that we need and this is why. And this is what you get in return. The example I said earlier around the brewery raising $2 million in 2 days, the reason people invested is because they knew that the space that the brewers were in was too small, and that if they moved into this new space, they could triple production, and that they actually had demand for that. So people were really keen to support when they could understand exactly how that money coming in was going to help the company grow. But you also need a good crowd. So the second C is your crowd. Sometimes I have people ask me if there's a crowd in the cloud. There's not a crowd in the cloud. There are people that might be excited about what you're doing once they see that you've got traction, but they're not going to be the first movers in investing in your company. So you need to make sure that you have the people that you know interested in what you're doing before you go live. One example that I love of this was a young woman named Brianne West, who started a solid shampoo bar business. And when she was moving from her home kitchen into a factory, she went out to her customer base. And 90% of the people that invested in her campaign were actually current customers when she went out to raise $200,000. And 3 of them were chemists. So when she was having trouble figuring out how to double her batching in her new factory, one of her investors actually came in and solved that problem for her. And it was really interesting because with Brianne, especially early on, people weren't really sure about what she was doing. They didn't think she was an investable proposition. But last year, she was found to be the 4th fastest growing company in New Zealand with over $10 million in revenue. And the final C that you need to think about if you're thinking about going out to your crowd is good comms. Like, how are you going to communicate what you're doing to your crowd? And normally this is through social media and online means, but also traditional media and other ways of getting people excited about what you're doing. This group actually came together when Cadbury's decided to stop making chocolate in Dunedin, a small town of New Zealand. And they decided that they were going to try and buy the factory that made chocolate and keep jobs in their local community. Unfortunately, they realized quite quickly that the factory cost a lot more money than they were legally allowed to raise from the public through crowdfunding. But they decided instead to shift and raise the money to buy a chocolate company and grow that. And they actually managed to raise the $2 million that they wanted in 32 hours from their local community, pretty much because they got people excited through traditional media, but also because they offered people a 20% discount for the life of their investment. So if they bought $100 worth of shares and then $500 worth of chocolate, they'd effectively eaten their investment. And a lot of people did that. So every time they send out a newsletter now, they see an uptick in sales. And the first few times they sent out newsletters, they actually sold out of chocolate. So if you're thinking about crowdfunding, those are the 3 sort of things to think about. I have way more tips, but I think I'll probably leave it in case there's any questions or discussion around that. But what I would want to say is that right now, if you're thinking about crowdfunding, go out to your crowd and ask them if they would be interested in pledging. You can see either if they'd be interested in pre-buying the products that you're making or experiences that you could offer around your business. The more original, the better. I think one of my favorite rewards that I've ever seen was for a company. Oh man, there's so many great rewards, but just experiences. We've seen people create experiences you wouldn't get anywhere else, like a cheese company that hosted high cheeses. So instead of high tea, you could come along and try all of the cheeses together with the cheesemakers and ask questions. Or when Yeasty Boys was going out, the craft brewery, to raise their money, they said if people pledged over $2,000, they teach you how to home brew with them every year at the AGM. So people are actually learning how to make beer with the brewers of their favorite beer. So go out to your crowd and see if they'd be interested either in pledging for rewards or investing in your company and being part of that growth journey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. I'll just bring this back on. I did something wrong there. We've got you back on screen now.
Awesome.
So thank you very much for that. I found that interesting. Each time we have someone talk to us about crowdsourced funding or equity fundraising, we get a slightly different slant. And I was intrigued with some of the time periods you were just giving us of how quick capital was raised. That's great. And I gather New Zealand's got an upper limit of $2 million, has it?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, have you got any comments there, in particular that Anna's estimate or indication that the estimates are $300 billion to be raised internationally by 2025?
Well, listening to the examples, Peter, it could be more than that.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to hear how local communities, once they get the message, once they understand what the business is trying to do, how supportive they will be. And isn't that a broader trend that's occurred where, because we've been locked down into our communities, we're now going, hey, I actually value them a lot more than I used to. Hence, I've got this, call it a gut feel, that we're going to be more supportive of our communities. And that's really what came through loud and clear with all your examples. They were motivating.
I think that's the thing that we're seeing is the sort of the buy local movement is growing.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful that the invest local movement will grow too.
Yes.
Partially out of necessity, I think, as we see that it's harder to send things overseas for the interim. What does it look like if we're selling and investing locally for a little while?
And we've got to support locally to survive and to keep jobs.
Yeah.
I think people are realizing that as well.
Yeah.
And your last point about comms was exactly that. We've got to help people understand what we're trying to do, and then they'll step forward and help us.
Yeah. And ask that in a way that they feel like they can help. Yes.
And that was incentivized by allowing them to participate in some cheaper chocolate, or how to make a beer, or take me on a date and I'll give you a cookie, or whatever it was.
A cookie date, I like it.
It was fantastic. It's
Pity all this wasn't around many years ago, Andrew, wasn't it?
Well, that's right, Pete. But it's imaginative, Anna. That's what.
Yes, very.
And I think that's the thing. It sort of ties into what you were saying earlier, Andrew, around delighting people. I think the campaigns that we should do well are the ones that aim to be imaginative and delightful. And you're not applying for a grant. You know, this isn't a form that you're filling out in triplicate that sounds quite dry. Like, this is you engaging with real humans and making them want to engage back.
And social media allows you to do that and to have those conversations and tell those stories. And often, I'd imagine some of those ideas might have come from the younger team members within those businesses. And then they appear in the offerings and the stories. And it comes back to having teams and regular discussions, and having an open mindset, saying, what do you lot think?
Yeah, I remember Yeasty Boys, the second successful campaign that we had, directory crowdfunding. They had this pitch video that I actually had to show to my board and be like, "Is this allowed?" Because it was this animated pitch video, which included an animation of the Queen wearing a G-string, chugging their beer. And I was like, is this okay? And the only feedback I got from my board was someone just being like, what was the music behind that? I really liked it. But yeah.
That's good that they weren't upset and so politically correct that they went, we can't support this.
Yeah, we did have one woman who actually saw the pitch video before the campaign went live who said they would never be successful. They were obviously immature boys. And I told Stu, that the founder, I was like, oh, you have this woman who's very angry because she really likes the Queen. And he was like, oh, that's good. That's my filter. I only want people to invest that get us. So, you know.
Well, who drinks beer?
Yeah. Immature people.
Young naughty boys.
And naughty girls. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I was pleased to see that some people over 30 with grey hair are taking their business ventures. I've come across a few of those over the years, even well before crowdsourced funding. So are you finding that, I think you mentioned 80% are under 30. Is that trend also applicable in Australia, Anna?
Yeah, I think we're seeing similar in Australia. Okay. Though we are, one of my favorite companies that we worked with in Australia was Mungali. I don't know if you know them.
I know.
Yeah, so they've been going for 20 years.
Yes, I live in North Queensland. I've tasted their products up there a few times.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a biodynamic dairy, 20 years in business. And it was really awesome to see them working actually quite closely with their daughter to create the campaign around this and really tell their story. But they're farmers, so it was quite hard to get them to communicate. But they did really well in the end, especially when Rob started going to the weekend markets and sharing what they were up to and why they were raising the investment.
And listening to the customers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely in those markets.
Mm.
Anna, obviously you've got a foot in both markets, been involved in the New Zealand market as well as the Australian market. New Zealand's had equity crowdfunding longer than Australia. Do you see that New Zealand's still in front of Australia, or is Australia catching up? Or are there things that Australia can learn from what New Zealand's done in this market?
Yeah, I think Australia is definitely catching up now. So we've had equity crowdfunding now in operation for a while. I think the thing, and this sort of ties into your point around accountants as advisors, I think where it could improve in Australia is a greater understanding on how to support companies that are thinking about doing this, but also how do we make it easier for the companies, both from a support perspective, but also from a legislation perspective. It is still quite difficult for companies to prepare. There are a lot of rules. Some of them are good, but some of them are a little bit overcooked. And so, yeah, there's definitely room to try and make things a little bit easier for companies to grow.
Okay, well, this video today, this webinar, a video recording, is targeted at small businesses and medium-sized enterprises. Hopefully some people have watched you and have got all enthusiastic. What's their next step from your point of view?
Yeah, so if they're interested in chatting, they can definitely get in touch through our website. So it's pledgeme.com.au, or find me on Twitter or any other social media. But yeah, I think the first step before even chatting to us is chatting to their customers and their crowd, seeing if this is something that would make sense for them from feedback that they're getting, and just being clear on, yeah, they've got a good company, a good crowd, and good comms before they hit go.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Anna. And I've got no other questions, so we might just move on and do the COVID news update, which we do each week in this, to try to keep people aware of what's happening. So we'll just change the screen back and we'll move on. So the COVID news update, regular viewers will notice some of these items are being repeated, and they're being repeated on purpose because the first item there, the coronavirus SME guarantee loans, definitely conclude on the 30th of September. There was an article in the Financial Review a couple of weeks ago which indicated that the actual allocation of this money, which has been supplied by the Reserve Bank and the Australian government, is well below what the government had thought it would be. Maybe the banks are selling other loans or people aren't applying for it. But remember, the loans are for working capital purposes for a maximum of 3 years, maximum amount of $250,000. The Reserve Bank approval letters that were made public that were sent to the banks indicated that the loans were to cease at the 30th of September. So if you think you're going to need some finance during this year that you want to borrow, alternatively, of course, if you want to raise some capital, Anna and her colleagues would be very happy to talk to you about raising money utilising crowdsourced funding, or I assume Section 708 of the Corporations Act. But just bear in mind that those loans are only available to the 30th of September. If you've finished your accounts now for the month of June, or at least know what your revenue figure was, and you have noticed that your turnover has dropped 30% as compared to June 2019, and you're not currently in the JobKeeper program, you can apply to join JobKeeper from now to the 30th of September. Obviously, you have to be paying your staff, and you will be able to claim up to $1,500 per employee. I suggest you see your accountants to get this application organised. At last, most of the states and territories, that's one advantage New Zealand's got, haven't they? They've only got one government and one house of government, which I think might make life a little bit easier when you try and implement programs like this.
Yeah.
But the states and territories have now introduced their legislation and their processes, which I think is more the hold-up, for the grant applications from home builders and renovators. Hopefully this is going to lead to a lot of work for builders and some tradies who are involved in doing work within houses. The grant is $25,000. The Treasurer has said that there could be an extension for a month or 2 months because of the delays in the states getting things organised. And to be fair to them, one of the big problems was being able to communicate and get information from the tax office as to what people had earned in the year ended 30th of June 2019, because that's the income levels that have been established in the legislation. And it's not easy to get that information from the tax office. If you have qualified for JobKeeper, you can negotiate for commercial rent relief with your landlord. There was an article in the Financial Review about 2.5 weeks ago, which indicated in the major shopping centres around Australia, 80% of the SME tenants had proceeded to have negotiations with the landlords. I don't think the landlords are very happy about how a lot of this has worked out, but if you're in business and you're in a commercial lease, doesn't have to be in a shopping centre, it can be anywhere, that you would like to renegotiate, you can rely on the commercial rent relief rules with your landlord. Again, I'd suggest you have a discussion with your accountant about getting your application and approach in place. The Commonwealth Bank last week released their accounting market pulse. Now, this is a report for accountants, and you don't jump at me through the screen and say, what are you talking to us about accountants for? Because within this survey, accountants were asked to identify what their, and I'll read it to you, what practice area do you expect to be most in demand in the next 6 to 12 months? And the accounting profession has answered, providing business advisory services is expected to be the highest demand service area. In fact, they gave it a rating of 70%. The next closest was business recovery and insolvency. So that's a bit of a warning signal. That was 61%. Everything else is under 50%, including taxation, which was listed at only 48%. So if you're sitting there saying, geez, I'd like my accountant to do more work for me, please pick up the phone and talk to them, have a conversation. And maybe if they're a bit reluctant, remind them of this article in the Commonwealth Bank's produced, and you might be able to get your accountants to do some more work. If you are unable to get your accountant to assist you because they are too busy doing tax returns, and they are very busy on these JobKeeper declarations that have to be made by the 14th day of every month, please send me an email, peter@ess.biztools.com.au, and I will send you details of accountants all over Australia who are our subscribers who can assist you to get a better understanding of what they can do with business advisory services. And that's what I've just told you.
Indeed.
Yeah, I forgot I had that slide, Andrew. Action plan. I should have been looking at my upcoming slide, shouldn't I?
Doesn't matter.
You've heard from two very interesting speakers today who have both obviously, or Andrew I've known for a long time, has got a lot of experience as an educator, as a motivator, a mentor, a coach, and as a public company director and chair of a very successful public company that started as a one nurse veterinary surgery business in Townsville about, what, Andrew, 30 years ago?
Yes, Peter.
And maybe 35 years ago,
Yeah.
under Dr. Glenn Richards. and ended up in the top 200 ASX list. So companies can do it. So those of you who are sitting out there today, running your businesses, you might like to think about it. And we've heard from Anna, who's given you some insights into the equity raising opportunities that are available there for people making cookies through to making beer. And there's quite a number of them around Australia that have been supported by a number of the crowdsource funding intermediaries. So the opportunity is there for virtually anyone if you have developed your vision, your strategies, and you have developed a crowd of potential supporters. You should be writing that down now for 2020-21. If you've already done it, congratulations. That's great. Discuss this with your accountant and ask them to prepare you a business plan, strategic plan, but work with them. Sit down round the table. Don't just leave it to your accountant to prepare. You'll get back something that might look a bit like a balance sheet, but it requires your input, but your accountant can normally write it and will have the time to dedicate to it when you're busy running your business. And part of that process, you're going to need budgets and cash flow forecast, preferably looking at the next 3 years. Why? The Australian government's ombudsman for small business, Kate Carnell, has indicated that she believes that the problems with business operations are going to continue until at least the end of December 2021. And if you happen to be thinking about trying to borrow one of those loans on coronavirus, SME guarantee loans of up to $250,000, they have to be repaid in 3 years in any case. And it will help you in your planning. And please consider your funding requirements. I think it's going to be very difficult to borrow money from banks once we get beyond 30 September. Some accountants are telling me that their clients' experiences are that it's very difficult now. The banks have already outlaid a lot of money in loans. There's been debts put on hold, extended. And in fact, today in the Accountants Daily magazine website, it's indicated that the banks have agreed to a 4-month deferral extension from the end of September for individual applications. So if you want to extend, you've got to go and have a discussion with your bank, and they will give extensions of up to 4 months. So that's taking you potentially through to January 2021. But maybe it's a time to be talking to your accountant and getting some discussions going on about equity crowd funding as to whether that is one of the activities that you might like to explore in your business. And I'm sure Anna would be happy to talk to you. ESS Small Business, we're here to assist SMEs on the COVID-19 survival plan. Debtors management, because we've identified debtors management as an area that many of you are going to really have to have a look at. A lot of professional firms like accountants have got very high work in progress balances at present. All that's got to get invoiced, and then it becomes a debtors collection function. I think you should be looking at checking that your retail pricing, your product mix is adequate to meet your profit targets. And the same type of comment applies to charge out rates that tradies are using and professionals are using. Are the individual productivity figures and charge out rates for your team members, your markup on external purchases, etc., your overhead expenses, when you put all that together, are you going to achieve your desired profit target? Unfortunately, that gets forgotten a lot. And if you want an introduction of accountants that can assist you to offer a Chief Financial Officer service, please contact us. So why not visit us at esssmallbusiness.com.au. We can view what products are available. Our next webinar in this series for SMEs is on next Wednesday, the 15th of July at 12 noon AEST. And our presenters are Trent Butler from Trent Butler and Associates. Trent is an accountant, but he is specialised in marketing primarily through the use of social media, LinkedIn in particular. I think you'll find the message he will give you. And we have another crowdsourced funding intermediary, Arthur Acker, who's the operations manager of Equitize, who are based in Sydney, but they also have a similar business in New Zealand. So they are the presenters next week. To register for that webinar, please go to ESS Small Business website and click on webinars. And you can contact us for some more information. So thank you very much to Anna and Andrew for being with us today. Anna, thank you very much, particularly as you are in Wellington. Is it a nice day over there?
Oh gosh, it's so wet and cold.
And probably
I want to
windy.
be back in Brisbane. Yes, definitely windy as well. Yeah.
And Andrew, thank you very much for joining us from the Sunshine Coast.
Pleasure, Peter.
So think about your strategies and funding requirements for 2020-21 now, please. Thank you for being with us today. Stay safe and have a great day. So thank you very much. And we look forward to you joining us next time. Thanks, Andrew.
Peter.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Anna. Nice to meet you.